Today, I am taking up the topic part 2, transport of respiratory gases under the chapter respiration and breathing of gases. So what are the respiratory gases? Oxygen and carbon dioxide, and both of them are transported by the blood. Before we know the transportation of the gases, we have to understand the partial pressure of oxygen and carbon dioxide present in the various parts of the body. So the partial pressures are always measured in mmHg. Now, the respiratory gases are oxygen and carbon dioxide. In the atmospheric air, the partial pressure of oxygen is 159. In the alveoli of lungs, 104 mmHg. In the arterial blood, 95 mmHg. In the venous blood, 40 mmHg. And in the tissues, 40 mmHg. That is about the partial pressures of oxygen. Coming to the partial pressures of carbon dioxide, it is 0.3 in the atmospheric air, 40 mmHg in alveoli, 40 mmHg in oxygenated blood or in the arterial blood, 45 mmHg in the venous blood or deoxygenated blood, and 45 mmHg in the tissues. These partial pressures are very important in loading and unloading of oxygen. Then, exchange of gases. That means exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide. The exchange occurs at two places. The first place is alveoli. The second place is in tissues. In the alveoli is what happens? Oxygen is taken up by the hemoglobin and oxygen is released in the tissues. Whereas in the lungs, carbon dioxide is released to the outside, and in the tissues, blood collects carbon dioxide. So, blood collects oxygen in the lungs and releases the oxygen in the tissues. While the blood collects carbon dioxide in the tissues and releases it in the alveoli. Then, we have to study the structure of one alveolus. This is the alveolus. It is a sac-like structure. The alveoli are surrounded by blood capillaries. The blood flowing through the capillary and the air present in the alveoli are separated by three very thin layers. They are the endothelium of the capillary. This is alveolar wall, this black one. In between the endothelium of the capillary and alveolar wall, there is a thin basement membrane. So these three layers separate the air from the blood. But these three layers are very thin. All the three layers constitute only 1 mm thickness. So it is very thin and gases can travel easily through this membrane. Then, venous blood flows through the capillary like this, and after oxygenation, oxygenated blood comes out like this. So in the alveoli, the PO2 is 104 mmHg. In the blood, it is only 40 mmHg. Then what happens? Oxygen moves from the alveolar cavity into the blood. At the same time, the PCO2 is 45 in the blood and is only 40 in the capillary. So, carbon dioxide moves from the blood into the alveolar cavity. So, in this way, there is exchange of gases based upon the difference in their partial pressure. So, this diffusion is passive. No energy is spent because the partial pressure of oxygen is high in the alveolus and less in the blood flowing through the capillary. Oxygen moves from alveolar cavity into the blood. In this way, blood is oxygenated or hemoglobin is saturated with blood. Because the partial pressure of carbon dioxide is higher in the blood and lower in the alveolar cavity, carbon dioxide diffuses from the blood into the alveolar cavity and from there it is expelled out. In this way, in the alveoli, exchange of gases takes place. Then, solubility of carbon dioxide is 20 to 25 times more than that of oxygen in the blood. This is a very important point. So carbon dioxide dissolves very rapidly in the blood than the oxygen. Then the blood is responsible for transporting both the respiratory gases. Now let us see how the oxygen gas is transported through the blood. 97% of the oxygen is transported by the hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is the respiratory pigment present in the red blood corpuscles. About 3% of oxygen is transported in a dissolved state through the blood plasma. Now let's say this is the hemoglobin, this is oxygen. One hemoglobin molecule, when fully saturated, can combine with 4 oxygen molecules. So when oxygen combines with hemoglobin, it forms oxyhemoglobin. This is oxyhemoglobin. When fully saturated, this hemoglobin carries 4 oxygen molecules. This process is not oxidation, but oxygenation. We have to remember, it is oxygenation and not oxidation. And this process is also reversible. In the alveoli, this reaction takes place, and in the blood or in the tissues, the reverse reaction takes place. In this way, hemoglobin transports about 97% of oxygen to the tissues. 3% is transported in a dissolved state through plasma. Then, what are the factors affecting the transport of oxygen? There are 4 factors that affect the transport of oxygen. These 4 factors are partial pressure of oxygen, partial pressure of carbon dioxide, hydrogen ion concentration, and body temperature. These 4 factors are very, very important in loading and unloading of oxygen from hemoglobin. Coming to the lungs. In the lungs, PO2 is high, PCO2 is low, hydrogen ion concentration is also low, and body temperature is also low when compared to the tissues. So in the lungs or in the alveoli, there is more partial pressure of oxygen, less partial pressure of carbon dioxide, less hydrogen ion concentration, and less body temperature when compared to the tissues. As a result, what happens? All these factors facilitate formation of oxyhemoglobin or loading of oxygen. So because of these 4 factors, oxygen combines with hemoglobin forming oxyhemoglobin. In this way, hemoglobin is saturated with oxygen. Then, when the same oxyhemoglobin goes to the tissues through the blood, what happens? It faces these 4 factors. In the tissues, the partial pressure of oxygen is low, partial pressure of carbon dioxide is high, hydrogen ion concentration is also high, and body temperature is also high. All these 4 factors cause dissociation of oxygen from oxyhemoglobin. In this way, oxygen that is loaded in the lungs is unloaded in the tissues, and this oxygen is made available for various metabolic activities. So, this is a very important point. So, these 2 events help in transport of oxygen from the alveoli to the tissues. Then, how much oxygen the blood can transport? When fully saturated, 100 ml of blood can transport 5 ml of oxygen. So 100 ml of blood and full saturation is capable of transporting 5 ml of blood. Then how much carbon dioxide the blood transports? 100 ml of blood can transport only 4 ml of carbon dioxide. These points are very important. Then we have to study oxygen dissociation curves. Oxygen dissociation curves are sigmoid in shape. This curve. The black color one is oxygen dissociation curve which has a sigmoid shape. The sigmoid curves have great physiological significance. Even a small decrease in the partial pressure of oxygen in the environment brings a large fall in hemoglobin saturation with oxygen. So this is the sigmoid curve. On the x-axis I have written partial pressure of partial pressure of oxygen in mmHg. On the y-axis we have written percent saturation of hemoglobin with oxygen. That means HbO2. At 100 mmHg of PO2, hemoglobin is fully saturated. 100% of hemoglobin is saturated with oxygen. It happens in the alveoli. Then, in the alveoli, 100% of hemoglobin is saturated with oxygen. Then, let us see what happens if the PO2 is only 30 mmHg. So, in the alveoli, where the PO2 is 100 mmHg, 100% of hemoglobin is saturated with oxygen. What happens at 30 mmHg of partial pressure of oxygen? In the tissues, naturally, the partial pressure of oxygen is low. So let us say in the tissues, the PO2 is only 30 mmHg. Then you see where it intersects the sigmoid curve. It is intersecting here. That means when the PO2 is 30, only 50% of hemoglobin is saturated with oxygen. What does it mean? When the hemoglobin enters the tissues and where it encounters low PO2, oxygen cannot bind over to the hemoglobin at 100% level. So, 50% of the oxygen that is bound to the hemoglobin dissociates and released into the tissues. This is known as unloading of oxygen. So in the tissues, as the PO2 is low, automatically oxygen leaves the hemoglobin and is made available to the tissues for various metabolic activities. So this sigmoid curve is very important. Now you take 40 mmHg. 60% is saturated like that. Just by intersecting the sigmoid curve, we can find out at what percentage of PO2 how much oxygen is released from oxyhemoglobin in the tissues. Bohr effect. So it was discovered by Bohr, a scientist. So it is known as Bohr effect. Bohr effect means the effect of partial pressure of carbon dioxide and hydrogen ion concentration on the oxygen binding ability of hemoglobin is called Bohr effect. So I have told you, in the tissues, there is low PO2, high PCO2, high hydrogen ion concentration and high body temperature. So mainly these two, high partial pressure of carbon dioxide and a high hydrogen ion concentration in the tissues have effect on the binding ability of hemoglobin with oxygen. So in the tissues, at the carbon dioxide partial pressure and hydrogen ion concentration increases, what happens? These two factors cause the oxyhemoglobin to release oxygen from oxyhemoglobin. And this oxygen is used in metabolic activities. That is about Bohr effect. That means as the hydrogen ion concentration and as the partial pressure of carbon dioxide increases, more and more oxyhemoglobin dissociates into hemoglobin and oxygen. That is about Bohr effect. One more point you have to remember here. What happens if the PCO2 and hydrogen ion concentration increase? Then the sigmoid curve shifts to right. Just you can see here. If it shifts to right, what happens? I have drawn. At 30 mm PCO2, 50% of hemoglobin is saturated with oxygen. But when the graph shifts here, see only 20% of hemoglobin is saturated with oxygen. That means, see the difference, 50-20. Instead of 50% of oxyhemoglobin, only 20% of oxyhemoglobin is present. That means 30% of the oxyhemoglobin is dissociated or releases oxygen. That means more and more oxygen is made available to the tissues. That's why when we do exercise or doing some hard work or climbing mountains, the sigmoid curve shifts to the right. And this results in more and more unloading of oxygen. And this oxygen is used in metabolic processes. That is the significance of the sigmoid curve and Bohr effect. Coming to the transport of carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is transported in three ways. 20 to 25% of carbon dioxide is transported as carbaminohemoglobin. Carbon dioxide combines with the proteins present in the RBC and forms carbaminohemoglobin. 70% of the carbon dioxide is transported as bicarbonate. 7% of carbon dioxide is transported as carbonic acid. Just I have drawn a RBC here. This is carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is highly soluble in water, I have already told you. So the carbon dioxide formed in the tissues enters the RBC. In the RBC there is water. This carbon dioxide dissolves in the water in the presence of one enzyme known as carbonic anhydrase. This is very important. So carbonic anhydrase is an enzyme present in large quantities in RBC. It is also present in small quantities in blood plasma. In the presence of the carbonic anhydrase, carbon dioxide combines with water, forming carbonic acid. This is carbonic acid. This carbonic acid immediately dissociates into hydrogen ions and bicarbonate. This is hydrogen ion, this is bicarbonate. Hydrogen ion is positively charged, bicarbonate is negatively charged. This bicarbonate diffuses into the blood plasma. As the bicarbonate diffuses into the blood plasma, chloride ions present in the blood plasma enter the RBC. To maintain ionic balance, maintaining ionic balance is very important. So to compensate this outward movement of bicarbonate, chloride ions move into the RBC. This is known as chloride shift or Hamburger phenomena. Then, this is oxyhemoglobin. Oxyhemoglobin dissociates into hemoglobin and oxygen. This released oxygen goes into the tissues. This hemoglobin combines with these hydrogen ions and forms hemoglobinic acid. Hemoglobinic acid. In this way, RBC participate in the transport of carbon dioxide. So this 7% of carbonic acid is formed in the plasma. When carbon dioxide dissolves in water, carbonic acid is formed. Soda which we drink is nothing but carbonic acid. It was also discovered by Priestley, who discovered oxygen. So in this way, carbon dioxide is transported from the tissues to the lungs. PCO2 is a major factor affecting binding of oxygen with hemoglobin. So partial pressure of carbon dioxide is a major factor responsible for affecting binding of oxygen with hemoglobin. Already I have told you, when the partial pressure of carbon dioxide increases or when the hydrogen ion concentration increases, oxygen dissociates from the oxyhemoglobin. So in the lungs what happens? There is low PCO2. So loading of hemoglobin with oxygen takes place. In the tissues, there is high PCO2. So unloading of oxygen takes place from hemoglobin. Then, as I have told you, RBC contain a very high concentration of the enzyme carbonic anhydrase, and it helps in the formation of bicarbonate. So this reaction, CO2, H2O, H2CO3, carbonic acid, it dissociates into bicarbonate and hydrogen ions. I already have told you, the hydrogen ions move out of the RBC and the chloride ions move into the, bicarbonate moves out of the RBC and the chloride ions move into the RBC. This is called chloride shift. Then, all these reactions are reversible. These reactions occur in the tissues and these reactions occur in the alveoli of lungs. So already I have told you, 100 ml of venous blood can transport 4 ml of carbon dioxide. Then, regulation of respiration. How this respiratory mechanism is controlled or regulated. There is a respiratory rhythm center. Rhythm means, which means the rhythm of respiration, inspiration and expiration. This respiratory rhythm center is present in the medulla oblongata of the brain, or simply the medulla of the brain. It is responsible for respiratory rhythm. That means how you breathe in and breathe out air. And it has effect on inspiration mainly. Pneumotaxic center. Pneumo means air, taxic means movement. There is another one called pneumotaxic center. It is present in the pons. Pons is closely associated with the medulla. Pons is a part of cerebellum. So, the pneumotaxic center moderates the function of respiratory rhythm when the carbon dioxide levels and hydrogen ion concentration increases in the blood. Whenever the carbon dioxide PCO2 and hydrogen ion concentration increases in the blood, in the venous blood, what happens? This pneumotaxic center acts upon the respiratory rhythm center. As a result, the rate of inspiration increases. See, expiration is a passive process. Inspiration is very important. So when the rate of inspiration increases, what happens? More and more oxygen is taken by the blood and more carbon dioxide is released from the blood. So whenever the carbon dioxide concentration and hydrogen ion concentration increases in the blood, there is a safety mechanism. This pneumotaxis center alerts the respiratory rhythm center to increase the rate of respiration or the rate of inspiration. As a result, carbon dioxide is expelled from blood and oxygen is loaded into the blood. Then, there are also receptors. There are some sensitive receptors. They are present in the aorta. Aorta is the main blood vessel that carries blood or oxygenated blood away from the heart. Then, carotid arteries. Carotid arteries carry blood to the brain and other parts of the head. So in the aorta and carotid arteries, there are some receptors. They also detect increase in the partial pressure of carbon dioxide and increase in hydrogen ion concentration, and they also alert the respiratory rhythm center to increase the rate of inspiration. In this way, carbon dioxide is reduced and oxygen is increased in the blood. So in this way, there is regulation of respiration in our bodies. So that is about the transport of respiratory gases. Okay, thank you.